Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's Mike here at Game From Scratch, and there are three probably most common game engines out there: Unreal Engine, the Unity game engine, and the Godot game engine, and deciding which one is right for you can be a tricky task. So instead of doing a this versus that video, what I'm going to instead do is show all three game engines doing the same task, and you can look at it and say, okay, well, I like the way X does this better. Not one engine is better than the other, they're just different. So we're going to take a look at the Godot game engine, which is a free and open source game engine. You've probably heard of, if not, I've covered it a ton in this channel. The Unity game engine, which is probably the biggest mass market and definitely the leader in the mobile gaming segment, but there are a ton of games shipped on Steam made using the Unity game engine. And then of course we have Unreal Engine, probably the king of the AAA space, but again, there are a ton of indies made using Unreal Engine as well. What I'm going to do is look at the most recent shipped version of each. That means no Godot 4 or Unreal Engine 5.1, etc. So we're going to be using Godot 3.5, we're going to be using Unreal Engine 5.0, and Unity 2022 point whatever it's at. So we're going to start things off with getting started. If you like this series, we will continue on though, and we will cover things like creating a sprite, loading a sprite sheet, 3D models, playing sound, and that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in seeing how each different engine performs a given task, let me know with this series and I will keep it going. All right, so let's start things off with the Godot game engine. And Godot is as simple as it gets. To install Godot, you go to the website, you download either an installer or a zip file. I went with the zip file approach here. You have to choose between mono or not mono. Basically, do you want to program using the C# language? Use this version. It is a superset of the other version. Really, it's not something you need to put a lot of thought into, because even at the biggest, this is a 63 megabyte file. So that's not really a huge concern unless you are really tight on space. Just go ahead and download the mono version, even if you're not using mono, extract it out, and then run Godot. Now, there is a launcher of sorts with Godot, but it's nothing like the other ones. It's just basically the project manager. This is the first screen you will get when you load up the Godot game engine. Your previously created games will all be here. Creating a new game in the Godot engine is super simple. Basically, click New Project, pick the folder you wish the project to be in. You could also, of course, navigate like so. Once you've got the folder you want, it needs to be an empty folder for it to create the project in. So what you do up here is create your game name. This is my Godot game name. Create the folder. It will create that folder at the directory you selected earlier on, and pick the renderer. You've got a choice between OpenGL ES2 and ES3 with Godot 3.5. Now, when Godot 4 ships, you will also have a Vulkan option. If you're creating something for a higher end device, you're going to want to go with this option. In general, you're probably going to want to go with OpenGL ES. That's it. It will automatically load up the Godot game engine, and you just created your first game. It's really that simple. There's no difference between 2D and 3D in the world of Godot. Really, it just boils down to whatever your root node is. So if you create a 2D scene, your root node is a 2D node. If you created a 3D scene, your root node is a 3D node. That's kind of the extent of it. At any time, you can get back to the project list. I'm not going to save that project, and it will spawn you back to the launcher. You'll notice your game is here. You can now easily reload your game that way. Also, another option you have when you first load up Godot, you will find there's the asset library projects. There are a ton of different options in here, demos to get you up and going. You'll notice under categories, you can filter down to templates to build certain kind of games, kind of get you started with those things. So, example, if I was creating a WebXR game, I could start with that template right there. We've got some demos that you could actually start with there and modify these existing demos, or you have projects. Now, the difference between a project and a demo is a little arbitrary to me. Some of these are provided by the community. Some of these are provided by the Godot game engine. But if you want, there are a number of starting points that you could go from. Again, some are from Godot, some are from various different members of the community, and you can launch this way as well. So if you want to get in here and learn how to do 2D sprite shaders, see this one is a Godot engine project, you could also go ahead and create it that way. This will automatically download the template, create the folder for you, or ask you where to create the folder, like so. I'll create the folder there, and then it will load it for you. This is the exact same as creating the other project the other way. The only difference is it is going to propagate it so you have an actual example. So the nice thing is there are definitely some examples you can start with the Godot game engine, and they are available from that project launcher. All right, so now we're going to move on to the Unity game engine. Unity, you download the Unity hub. and then you install a version from the hub. There are some advantages to this. It makes it easy to manage multiple versions and copies of the Unity game engine. They've also got their learning material in here as well. So a variety of tutorials are available to you. And then your projects will all show up here in the project list. Go ahead and create a new project using Unity once you have the hub installed, and once you have installed a release, which, by the way, you install a new release up here. They've got pre-release beta versions available as well, so also alpha versions. If you want to go ahead and install one of those and watch your code all break, you can do it with the install button over here, or you just basically install the version available. You'll notice these LTS versions, those are long-term support or long-term stable versions. They are going to continue to get security updates for a long period of time, and they are a good starting point. So pick whichever version you wish. I'm using the current released version that is not beta, but is not LTS, which is 22.1.2. F1. You'll notice upgrades all the time. Once you have something installed, by the way, when doing the install, you're going to want to, here, I'll actually show you the version here. It's a key note. This is also true for when you install Unreal Engine as well. When you pick one of these, go through and make sure that you probably don't need any of this stuff. Until you start actually needing to build for other platforms, just make sure all this stuff is unchecked. You don't need other foreign languages, etc. It can really cut down the size required. Also, for some reason, it always wants to install Visual Studio Community, even if you have Visual Studio installed. Turn that off. It'll save you 1.2 gigabytes in size as well. So once you have your version installed, you go to projects and you can create a new project that way. So here, now it gets a little bit more complicated, or we actually go a lot more complicated with Unity in terms of what you want to start with. So it's not a matter of just create a project. You have to create the type of project you wish. You also want to come up here and pick your version, because it's going to control what other options are available. Now, in the world of Unity, you have three major pipelines: the built-in or the standard pipeline from before, and then you also have the universal render pipeline and the high-def render pipeline, or the ERP and the HDRP, as I like to call them. You also have a number of samples, so you can start with a sample scene project if you so wish to do so. But what you're going to want to do, if you're making a 3D game for mobile, you're probably going to want to use the ERP, or lower-end desktop. You're trying to create a console-level quality game or a high-end PC game, you're going to want to use the HDRP. If you haven't downloaded a template yet, by the way, you'll get the option over here to go ahead and download it. And this is going to kind of pre-configure how everything is set up. You can change these things after the fact, so don't sweat it too much. But you're going to probably want to have this dictated based off of the assets that you have available to you, or what kind of game you're going to create. So I'll show you with the HDRP pipeline what the process is like. So we'll go ahead. We will download the template. It is all handled internally, as you saw. Not a big deal. Name your project, my new HDRP game sample, and create. And this will then go ahead, spawn off, create your thing, load up the version of Unity. Now, I always, back when I was creating the project, I know that little drop down at the top where I switch between versions, I screw that up every single time. And I always make it in an earlier version and then end up upgrading it to the most current version. So do double check that. Now, one of the downsides you're going to find with Unity, especially when I selected the HDRP, but just in general, the startup times for your initial project are not amazing. There's quite a bit of shader compilation, etc. going on here. Now, this is nothing compared to when we get to Unreal Engine, but you will find that this process can take a decent amount of time. So I'm going to go ahead and pause it while this project is being created. All right, so that took about 10 minutes to get to this stage where my project was created. This is not my fastest or newest computer. This is about a 3-year-old computer with a 2070 GPU. So it should give you an idea about the amount of time that's involved. You'll also notice that now that I'm here, there's still some shader compilation going on in the background as well, or burst compiler stuff as well. You'll also notice if you pick the HDRP setting, you may want to come in and set and configure some things. If you're importing another project, you can convert over and so on. But for the most part, this HDRP window, if you created an HDRP project, will automatically pop up, but chances are you can just immediately shut it down. Now, one thing to be aware of when it comes to the Unity game engine, unlike what we saw with the Godot game engine, and we'll see later on with the Unreal game engine, if you want to work with a template, like an existing project off their asset store, what you have to do is create an initial project and then basically overwrite it. So what you do then is you come in Windows, you go into the asset store, which is basically available online. Once you have your asset available, go into the package manager, you go to My Assets, you find the particular asset you wish to create the project from. So I'm trying to figure out what. So 2D Game Kit, for example, if I wanted to go ahead and do that, I click download and then import, and then it will overwrite my project with that project. It's kind of a clunky approach. Now, one thing to be aware of, the final thing about Unity before we move on, is that you can also potentially have started from source code. So if you had a project from GitHub, you could create or open it that way as well. In order to do that, what you do is you go back to the hub right here, and you can go here, and you can say add project from disk. So you can clone it down that way, and then you can import in your Unity project that way. So if you have an existing project from disk from another source other than the Unity asset store, you can get it that way. Otherwise, getting one of their samples in is a little bit clunky. You go, again, to the asset store, which is available. It's no longer integrated. It's a website now. And then once that asset is added to your account, you can import it here and then import it in and load it that way. So that is how you would get started with the Unity game engine. Again, you have three major kind of project types, all built around the kind of rendering that is built in the rendering pipeline you choose, either the standard, which is the legacy version, the universal render pipeline, or the high def render pipeline. If in doubt, in 2022, especially if you're making a mobile title, you probably want to start with the universal render pipeline if you do not know which of the three you want to go with, because it's well, it's universal. Now, finally, we have the Unreal Engine. Now, Unreal Engine has a launcher as well, and they use this between their gaming store and Unreal Engine. It's the Epic Games launcher. This is how you install Unreal Engine, and I don't think anyone likes the Unreal Engine launcher, Epic Game Launcher. I don't think anyone likes any of these hubs, to be honest, but it's just the way the world has gone. You go into the Unreal Engine section, and I want to point something out, and this is part of why people don't like this. Here is my task manager. You're going to notice Unity Hub is very low. The Godot game engine is very low. Epic's Games Launcher is very low, or low, all right? So I'm going to switch over here to Library, which is where you want to start things off. And I'm going to head on back over here, and you will now notice that the Epic's Games Launcher is very high. It's using partial GPU. I do not know what the dealio is there, but Epic Games Launcher can be a bit of a resource pick. Of the three, this is the one that you don't want to leave running in the background if you have a choice. Now, to go ahead and install one of the versions of the engine, that's where you need to start. So once you have installed the Epic Games Launcher, just basically come in here, click the plus button. It will put in a version that thinks that it's the best version. So if you do this, it should default to 5.0.3, which I already have here. Once you've picked that, by the way, you can also, when you are installing it, you can pick the settings. There's a lot of things that are installed that you do not need. You can really shave your install size down, by the way, but just drop down and pick the particular version that you want. Now, I don't actually want any of them because I already have it installed, as you'll see from the various different versions available. So there is a 5.1 preview out there, but what we are mostly interested in is this guy right here. Now, the nice thing with the Epic Games Launcher compared to say the Unity way of doing things, is if you actually have a project kit like this one, you'll notice here, I can just go ahead and create a project using that template. So if I want to use the arcade space shooter template, I can literally just create project, and it will just spit one out for me. I pick the version I want, and I am done. No need to load up anything. It's all done from the launcher. That is one thing they definitely got nice. Additionally, they give away assets every month, as you can see from my list of assets here. I've been doing it since the beginning, and I have a huge library. So tune in the first Tuesday of every month, and you can find out what the current assets is. But you can create a project directly from here, which is a nice difference. Otherwise, what you need to do is go ahead and create a project. In order to do this, pick a version of Unreal Engine that you're going to create the project with. So for my example, I am going to use 5.03. Simply click the launch button, and this is going to fire off Unreal Engine 5. As long as there's no updates to be done, it should be pretty straightforward. It's going to go ahead, and you can see it spawning right here. Now, one thing you will notice is in some versions, this will stall. If there was an update, a new release, or anything like that, it might stall at 45%. And just sit there compiling shaders, especially on the Mac. For some reason, Unreal Engine 5, so sometimes takes 10 to 15 minutes to launch. It's very frustrating. I don't know exactly what's going on. It's something about shader compilation. So if you run into that and you don't get an instant load like I just did, that's probably what's going on. So next up, you're going to have to decide which kind of game you want to create. So obviously, you're not doing film production, architecture, or automotive product design or manufacturing if you're on this channel. So what you probably want is the Games tab. And here, really, you're just you're not making a ton of decisions at this point in time, to be honest, because every single setting you see here can be changed. But what you're noticing here is if you're creating a first-person style game or a third-person or top-down or a vehicle or whatever, what this does is pre-configures things like the inputs and the default handling to set up for that kind of game. This sets up the default character controller and so on. You can see a description of how it's going to set things up. So it configures things, gives you a default actor in the scene, sets up a couple of blueprints for you to get started, but any of these things can be changed after the fact. So let's say we were creating a third-person style game, so I'm going to start with the third-person template. Then you have to pick what kind of defaults you want to go with, C++ or Blueprints. Blueprints are their visual scripting language. Obviously, C++ is the C++ programming language. Doesn't matter. You can switch back and forth at any time, so I'm going to stick with Blueprints. I pretty much always create it with Blueprints, to be honest. Again, you also pick your default target, so desktop or mobile level. Again, all configurable inside of the engine, although changing these will trigger a recompile of all of your shaders, which can take a very long time, and ditto for quality presets. So you've got maximum or otherwise. Also turn on ray tracing or not. And starter content is a bunch of simple character meshes and such. If you're creating a project and you've never worked with it, you're just playing around, that could be a good place to go. And then finally, name your project. Now, one interesting thing is, for some reason, there is a warning after 20 characters, and you cannot create this project. This can be turned off as a setting. Just one of those things to be aware of. Do not give your project a name more than 20 characters. So my game UE5, and we'll just go ahead and create that project. Obviously, you can set the path down on this side, and it will fire it up. Now, again, this process right here, the amount of time that it takes is highly variable. Sometimes it can be nearly instant. Sometimes the shader compiler can just sit there and spin for whatever reason. It's got something to do with caching of default assets or something. So you'll notice if this takes a very, very long time, it just happens sometimes, especially on the Mac platform. Ditto, when you come in here, you're going to notice there's going to be some compilations down here. It could be compiling shaders for ages, or it could just, like this, be instantly in and ready to go. It just kind of depends on how lucky you got when it comes to creating a project. So the nice thing with Unreal Engine, it's kind of like the Godot game engine. The decisions you make at the start really don't matter. You can change all of those settings after the fact. So I can change the quality settings here, for example. So if I want to change engine scalability, all it did, our default settings set everything here to epic. So if we needed to go with low instead, we just switch it over here. Ditto for all the other settings. So, and if you want to turn ray tracing on, you can turn ray tracing on after the fact. All it did is kind of did some pre-configured settings for you. Everything you choose when doing the Epic Game Launcher stuff is available after the fact. Now, one thing you do want to notice when you do launch Unreal Engine and create your first project, the launcher goes away. It minimizes down to the tray. So it's one of those things you want to be aware of. It's actually down here. So if you want to get back into the launcher, so for example, if I want to go ahead and add an asset from the asset store in, and I want to go back to the Epic Games Launcher, you have to load it here from the tray. Just the nature of the beast, it is automatically minimized when you come in. Otherwise, there you go, creating your first Unreal Engine 5 game. Again, they both have launchers. Nobody likes launchers. Once your project is created, though, you can actually open it directly. So you'll notice it is actually on the disk. So if you go to it here, I forget what I called it. I think I called it this one right here. You can open up the project directly like this without going through all the other process. It'll load it up in the correct version. You'll also notice you've got some actual options here in the Smart Shell that you could, if you want to switch versions, you can do an upgrade directly from the from the terminal, or from Explorer. So you don't need to necessarily go into the hub, except for to create things, to install new versions of the Unreal Engine game engine, etc. So once your project is created, you can basically shut down and ignore the hub, unless you want to go ahead and add some assets into your game. Now, those standard assets, by the way, those are all available down here. So you notice if you open up the settings here, you'll see here starter content, and then you just have a bunch of things to work with. So for example, I need some props. If I need some chairs for my world, I literally just bring them in and drop them into the world. So that's the starter content, and that's really the only other decision you made, is if you wanted to bring this in or not. And there is ways to actually import this content after the fact as well. So if you decide later on that you actually need these things, you need these wall lamps, and so on, you can actually import them in after the fact as well. So the decisions you make when you first launch Unreal Engine, they're not that important. They sound important. Do I want C++ or Blueprints? Yeah, I don't know. Don't worry about it. Don't sweat it. Whatever you pick, you can easily override it later on. Definitely the same thing with the Godot game engine. So in Godot, your project is what your project is. So really the only area where it's going to matter is in the Unity world. You're going to want to decide up front, do I want a standard? Do I want the universal render pipeline, or do I want the HD render pipeline? There are tools in place to switch between them, but it's a pain in the butt. So you're going to want to get that decision right off the start. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you create a Godot project, a Unity project, and an Unreal Engine project. Let me know what you think of each process. Also, let me know what you think of the idea of this series. Would you like to see more in this line? What I'm thinking is, again, pick a task and show you how you do it in all three engines. So again, importing and animating a 3D model, playing audio, that kind of stuff, handling physics. If you want to see how each task is performed in each engine, let me know and I can continue this series on. So if this series gets enough views and likes, I will create it as an ongoing series, and hopefully it is useful to some of you. Let me know what you think. I will talk to you all later. Goodbye.